There. Now we're recording for YouTube. So, someone in chat was asking, like, what even is Noxus? And I was like, that's a good question, because we know what Noxus was. Like, we know that Noxus was like a specific depiction of imperialist colonialism within the bounds of a fantasy universe, that it was the expansionist empire of Runeterra, that they had this sort of fake meritocracy ideology was like, yeah, we promote people based on merit, but merit means you are useful to the state, right? That's what Noxus considers merit, is like your ability to be of use to the state's engine of power, right? And that, like, that's what they consider strength as well, is like whatever's good for Noxus is strength, right? Like that's what strength is. Whereas if you were, for example, the world's best decolonizer, right? Like if the person in the world who's the absolute best that anyone has ever been at decolonizing colonized projects, Noxus is like, yeah, but that's not merit though. That's like, it doesn't matter how good at it you are. That's not merit. That's the opposite of merit, because it's not being used for the benefit of the state, right? Because we want to colonize stuff, and decolonizing stuff is contrary to our interests. Therefore, that is weakness. Therefore, that is not merit, right? Like, that's what Noxus was. Given that, the sort of assumption that pretty much everyone who follows League of Legends lore has is that the next show, the next thing, the next whatever, is going to be set in Noxus, right? Like, that Noxus is going to be the locus for their next bold experiment in storytelling. So, like, Piltover and Zaun, we used to know what Piltover and Zaun was. We used to know that before Arcane came in and rather changed a few things about it. So what is Noxus? I don't know, man. Give it a season or two. It might not be the same thing that it was anymore. Deep, exhausted sigh at Arcane being made the center of the canon. Again. Anyway, let's watch the cinematic for the season. The season that's the cinematic season of the Noxus thing, which is called Welcome to Noxus, Bite Marks featuring Taya. I believe this stuff is both stream and copyright safe, so I shouldn't get any knocks from trying to upload this with the audio. So let's go.
Noxus is where the strong gather. It seeks the fearless and defiant, calling them here to answer one simple question. Are you strong enough?
Oh, hey, Mel. And it is Fortiche animating this one again. Because of course. Ah, there's the man. Trundle? Okay. Oh, he is looking different, actually, Darius. Noxtora, huh? With the rose as symbol. Hey, Katarina. Pretty sure that's you. Oh, hello. I think the lesbians might be having a crisis. Yeah, that's not gonna go well for you, Darius. Oh, I think the gays might have a bit of a crisis about this, too. Yeah, Darius isn't Iceborne, so that's gotta have hurt quite badly. Yeah! Oh no! Curious who that guy is that Elise would bother to personally protect him like that. Oh, compound eyes, very good. I gotta say, I called bullshit a little bit on the idea that Darius could take Trundle in a one-on-one. I do. Not to power scale or whatever. Okay. There she is!
Every new path seems to lead us closer to chaos. Perhaps we should focus on the opportunity that's washed up on our shores.
What are you doing here, Astarion?
Our shores.
Unforeseen turns are simply part of any path.
Yes, but that, darling, is a step too far. Even for us.
Piltover was a lesson, Vladimir. Calamity is always approaching. In some moments, its arrival is more imminent than others. Our next move must be bolder, not safer.
Quite, okay. So usually an eye in the darkness would be... I mean, that would be a watcher. Typically. And if Darius is in the Freljord... then... I guess... Okay, fuck it. Let's run it back. So we open with LeBlanc's eyes staring at these patterns. And then we have this face. It's like a horse. Or a wolf. I guess it would be wolf with the star mark. Which cross-cuts to Mel arriving at the shore, which is like, again, Ambessa is like, oh, you are the wolf because you murdered me. Which, okay. I'm trying very hard not to sort of get into my feelings about the end of Arcane Season 2 here. And let's just go with it. This is where things are going, and my fucking god, Fortiche. You motherfuckers. Gott im Himmel. Just, they know how to compose a fucking shot, man. So I'm curious about the text, because, like, this specific kind of writing, this specific kind of text, right? I believe it is just like Noxian alphabet stuff, but also it's the same short from Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Yes, but also it's the text that's usually depicted on pieces of writing that discuss demons, right? In the context of League of Legends, which is interesting because demons haven't really shown up in the Arcane side of the verse yet, right? And it's curious how and why they would show up here, Because demons are creatures like Evelyn, like Fiddlesticks, like Nocturne, the various Azakana that Yone is running around fighting over in Ionia. We also, like, yes, Swain. It would have to be Swain, right? Like, it would have to be Swain, Raum. But Swain doesn't really show up here in this cinematic. So I guess that's just foreshadowing, which is the thing. That's the annoyance that I'm battling with myself right now, is like, okay, but how much of this is stuff that's meant to be interpreted now, and how much of this is stuff that you're supposed to go back after watching the Noxus show and go, oh my god, they foreshadowed it here. Like, how much of this is actually relevant to the cinematic itself? That's... Because I want everything to be, like, more self-contained and about itself. But that's a personal thing about me. So, Mel. She's very much dressing Noxian now. Like, compare and contrast with her character design back in, well, Arcane Season 1, basically, where she had the white and gold thing going on, which is very much the Piltover colors. Right now here, she's got the Chosen of the Wolf color scheme, basically. From that particular, like, skin line with the gold, the black, and the bright red as the counterpoint to it, which is like Mel fully stepping into her role as being the inheritor of the Medarda legacy, which is like, that was her tragedy in Season 2, right? Is that Mel had her own life, she had her own things that she wanted to do, she had her own ambitions, she was trying to make her own choices, and then her mom comes along and forces her to make the choices that Ambessa wants her to make, right? Like, which is to become a Medarda, become the matriarch of the family, to become the wolf, when what she wanted was to be the fox, right? That's Mel's tragedy as a character, and I liked that as a part of their storytelling in Season 2, even if I have my disagreements about how exactly it was executed. I like that Mel's tragedy is this thing of, like, much like the other characters in the show, no matter how much Mel has tried to run away from her family, run away from her mother's legacy, what she wanted Mel to be, it's going to come find her, right? Like, that legacy is not something you can just cut yourself off from, right? And the questions that were raised about, like, who Mel is, where she came from, the only way for Mel to get answers, right? The only way for Mel to find out who she is, where she came from, why she has these powers, is to do this, right? Like, it's to go to Noxus, it's to seek out other mages, it's to look for the Black Rose and find out their secrets, because they're the people who know where she came from. Like, LeBlanc is the one who knows where the hell Mel came from. Right? And, like, my issue with Mel in Arcane Season 2 is more that the mage storyline doesn't mesh very well with Arcane as a thing. Especially with what Arcane ended up doing, which was much more doing the Victor, like, glorious evolution thing. And Mel being a mage is just sort of a side plot to that doesn't really relate back to or connect to the main narrative, and feels more like... Certainly Mel's narrative in Season 2 felt more like, ooh, Mel, it's dangerous to be a mage alone in the world. Like, we're sort of teasing the Demacia conflict a little bit. We're teasing, like, the wider universe, but it didn't feel like it related very much to Arcane itself. It felt like it was spending a lot of time doing setup for some potential future show, which, like, clearly that's what it was doing. We can see that here, is that all of that stuff in Arcane Season 2 was not really about Arcane Season 2. It was about getting ready for this, right? And that annoys me, because Arcane Season 2 already had little enough time, right? Arcane Season 2 was already crunched enough and rushing enough without having a subplot tacked onto it that's entirely about setting the stage for the next show, right? Where, like, could we not have had Arcane, and then after Arcane we could have had a little mini-series where Mel goes through is that not a way that could have been done? But fuck it, whatever. Moving on. Now we get to the Mask of the Black Rose skins. And sort of this whole... literally, the visual reference here is Eyes Wide Shut, right? Like, we're literally referencing the Stanley Kubrick thing. But one thing that's interesting to me is how chaste all of this is. How remarkably unhorny this, like, masked, secret Eyes Wide Shut party is. It's like, these motherfuckers are dancing in an empty room. A barren, empty room with nothing. There's no loucheness. There's no, like, like people having orgies over in the corner. There's no like exquisite carpets. There's no drugs. There's no visible alcohol happening. There's no nothing. It's like the only guy who seems to be remotely enjoying himself at all is this fucking dude, whoever the fuck he is. Because he's having wine and sitting down, and everyone else just seems like they're having the least compelling time of their lives. Like the most boring ass party I've ever seen. It's just people walking around in circles around each other. Like, where's the hedonism? Where's the fucking secret cult sexual weirdness? Where's the anything happening here? It's just people walking in circles around each other. And that's... and that's another thing, right? Like, it's that Arcane was able to be R-rated. Right? Arcane was able to be, it's like, to have a lesbian sex scene on screen, which was lovely. Arcane was able to do that because once upon a time, it was like its own thing separate from the main canon. But now that we're heading into, oh, this is main canon territory, this is the trailer for the League of Legends video game that has to be PEGI-13, like safe for teens and whatever. All of a sudden, like now it's, it's a Eyes Wide Shut reference. It's definitely a reference to like the sort of, implied deep hedonism of weird cults doing strange mask parties in the back rooms of... Sure, it's definitely that, but also we can't actually do that. Like, we can't actually engage with that theme or that idea of these, like, weird occult parties with, like, strange and, like, unchristian rituals and all. We can't actually engage with those fears. We can't actually engage with any of the visual tropes surrounding all of that. So this has to be the world's most chaste, uninteresting, non-hedonistic cult party ever, right? And it's like, and it's just that thing of like, if this had been in an Arcane season, right? If this had been in Arcane, you just know that this would be way weirder and more sexual, right? Because Arcane multiple times, like, there is a scene in a brothel, right? Like, there is lesbian sex on screen. There are times when Arcane makes a point out of spending time just in the hedonism of excess, right? As a component of its storytelling, as a component of that it's telling stories about actual people. And now it's like, this is a trailer for the video game, in which case, it's people with clothes in a room with no furniture walking around each other. So, yeah. We get the eye thing going again, like, literally LeBlanc as she's staring into the patterns here. Oh, hey, look, it's an eye and the iris, and this is Arcane, and like this is like an ocularum, right? This is a prison or a space in which LeBlanc sees everything and controls everything kind of vibe. And I think even we get a little bit of that spiral pattern from the ocularum a little bit in, maybe a little bit like golden ratio spiral kind of thing. Seems that way. But again, that's just like, just my sort of personal annoyance of like, if you're gonna make this reference, if you're gonna do this Eyes Wide Shut thing, you ought to commit to it, right? Like, you ought to actually do it instead of this sort of half-assed, safe for all ages bullshit. But whatever. So this is LeBlanc's symbol for Darius, huh? The broad back. Now, the inclusion of the Freljord here is interesting for a number of reasons. Specifically, we know that Noxus has been making incursions into the Freljord for ages, and we know specifically that the Winter's Claw have been heavily resisting them. Like the Avarosa as well, but I believe the Noxians are most directly described fighting with the Winter's Claw, because Winter Claw territory is closest to where Noxian land borders with the Freljord run. And so that Darius is here and he's fighting this one-on-one duel with Trundle is interesting. First of all, because I don't know that Trundle would really do that. As he's characterized, like, he wouldn't really be like, I'll fight a one-on-one honorable duel. He's a cheater. He's a liar. He's a scoundrel. He's a scumbag. He's an asshole. Trundle isn't really particularly concerned with personal honor, and neither are the trolls as a culture. It's like, no, whoever has the biggest club and whoever beats the other guy to a pulp wins. That's the troll culture. So this whole, like, honorable single duel on a field it doesn't feel Trundle-like, right? It kind of doesn't feel like him. It feels much more like a Darius thing. And I gotta say, I quibble substantially with the idea that Darius could ever take Trundle in a fight. Not because Darius is weak, but because that's not really Darius's thing. Darius's thing is that he's a great war leader. Like, he's the best general that has ever walked Runeterra, right? Dude is the best man at doing warfare, but he's not necessarily the best personal single duelist. Whereas Trundle, the whole structure of Trundle society is like, whoever is the best guy at beating other people up, like on an individual level, is the guy who gets to be in charge of stuff, right? And so Trundle, not only being an Iceborn, not only being a troll who's like just inherently more physically powerful than Darius, not only having a true ice weapon, I don't like power scaling necessarily. It just feels weird that it's like Darius being able to take him at all, even a little bit, feels odd to me. But that's power scaling, right? Like, that doesn't really matter. What matters here is what the narrative is doing, and the narrative of this is, it gets about, like, I like it when the bite marks break the skin, right? Like, the song lyrics are all about, like, this intentional seeking out of danger as a way to demonstrate strength and to pursue accomplishment, right? Which is a very Noxian thing, right? Like, this Noxian thing of demonstrating strength, being strong, like, engaging with difficult tasks on purpose, even though it might have dire consequences, because it's gonna hurt, right? Like, which reflects back on Mel. Mel is going to Noxus. She's taking this tremendous risk with herself and her own life because she has to know. She has this ambition inside of her, right? Like, that she wants to find out these things that have happened to her. So narratively, it makes perfect sense within the context of the thing itself that, yeah, no, like Darius would take on this almost impossible task and find some way to win. Sure, why not? Like, that's the narrative of the thing. It's just, again, the thing I wonder about, the thing that sort of piques my interest about it is, okay, but what are we establishing here then? What are we establishing about Noxus's invasions into the Freljord? Are we establishing that Darius has somehow successfully managed to wrest away control of the troll tribes from Trundle? Because that's certainly the implication of this here when the trolls start to kneel to him, right? Or at least that Darius has certainly managed to command a lot of respect with the troll clans, and he will have severely, deeply undermined Trundle's power. Like, Trundle is going to lose his position as Troll King for this, at least such as the Freljord has been described before. So what are the lore implications of this exactly? Is Trundle not going to be the Troll King anymore? Is Darius going to be the Troll King? Is the Noxian invasion of the Freljord going to be relevant to whatever the fuck happens in the Noxus show? Because that's interesting, because, like, that would be interesting if the Noxus show instead, like, because everyone had the assumption that the Noxian show was going to be implementing the invasion of Ionia, right? The re-invasion of Ionia, like Swain's campaign of reconquest of Ionia. Was the assumption that that's where it's gonna go. If we're going to the Freljord, I would be happy with that, because I would love for Ashe and Sejuani to get the Arcane treatment. It's two sisters again, right? Just because their story is so well suited to the storytelling style of something like Arcane. I would like that. That would be lovely. Plus, the Noxus Ionia storyline it's well explored already. I would like to see because, like, if we're talking about Ashe and Sejuani and their relationship, the one thing that could make the two of them have to come together, force them to come together around anything, well, an outside enemy would do the trick. If a Noxian invasion is rolling over the borders, right, and Ashe and Sejuani kind of have to put their own fighting on hold to face a common enemy, that would work. Like, that's a narrative hook that would make sense for those characters. And of course, also visual opportunity for lots more Cespian Lex on screen. That would be interesting. It's that annoyance of, like, I can't really just see the cinematic as its own thing. I would love to just look at this cinematic and be like, okay, this is like a what-if story. This is like what if Darius and Trundle had a fight, and then this would be how it turned out. But I can't see it that way anymore, because absolutely fucking everything in this fucking short, this fucking cinematic, much like Arcane, now has to be read from the perspective of, oh, this is the lore of the actual main universe of the game. And it bugs me. It bugs me more than a little bit that these things cannot be disentangled at all anymore. I wish Arcane hadn't been canon. I've harped on about it a million times already. We don't need to hear it again, but still. Anyway, back to the sexless cult party. Inside the apple of LeBlanc's eye, seeing everything, manipulating everything moving in these predictable triangular patterns. And then Katarina tries to insert herself as this uncontrollable X factor, right? That's a very cool mask. I like the ambiguity that, like... Right, like, because when it first happens, it looks like a visual effect, right? Like, it looks like a weird psychedelic visual effect of, like, oh my god, what the fuck's happening? But then when you actually see, it's like, no, that's just what the mask looks like. The mask is designed to have this disorienting effect when the person wearing it is rotating, right? It's supposed to have this weird vibe when a person who has it on their head turns around. And I like that. Like, that's the weird cult shit that I wish there was a little bit more of at this fucking party, right? Like, where like, this fetishization or obsession with multiple faces, right? Like, this fetishization or obsession with things being faceless or multi-faced and nothing being what it seems. Because everything... That's the other thing about this cult party. Everything here feels way too prosaic. Right? Way too little stuff half glimpsed through, like, out of the corner of your eye through a haze of, like, incense and, like drug smoke or whatever. Everything here is way too brightly lit and kind of clear and obvious, and I would have loved more of this weird shit that we just kind of don't get. Like, the imagery is clear enough, though, right? Like, this multiple faces thing, right? Like, that no one is who they seem to be. And the little contrivance, right? Like, the contrivance of having Elise break off only half of Katarina's mask just so we get the little Phantom of the Opera riff over here. So we get this, like, asymmetrical mask. And the reveal, just so she looks good. It, like, I'm not criticizing that, by the way. It's just like, oh yeah, that's a good way to do that conceit. Still, who the fuck is this guy, and why does he matter at all? Because to the best of my knowledge, he's just an NPC, right? He doesn't seem to look like anyone that I particularly remember. But of course, that might be the point, right? Like, the point might be that that guy is nobody. That he doesn't matter. That he's not interesting. And that all of this is a trap to try and lure Katarina in. Which, you know, successfully works, and that certainly seems to be the implication of LeBlanc's gesture here, where we have Katarina with her daggers represented sort of in miniature in this thing, and now here comes the spider, right? Here comes Elise to try and capture the prey. So I guess this guy, like, the point of him is that he's just a nobody who doesn't matter, which, you know, fair enough. Oh, Fortiche, you bastards. The stabilization on the face is the thing here. Right? That the face is so stable and unmoving, it almost looks like it's a 2D picture, right? As it has this uncanny motion towards Katarina. No, like, he has the steadiness of head of a mildly confused chicken, right? Like, it's... And the whole rest of the body is moving, like, in these weird, disjointed ways. That's not really consistent with, like, a particularly human means of motion. But of course, that's the point with Elise. The stabilization is a really good touch. Of, like, barely twisting the head a little bit to look at her. but otherwise just holding on. Very cool. Also, just straight up, and this is something once I do my reviews of the Black Rose skins, this is just straight up a better base design for Elise. It just is. Like, this straight up, like, Elise as she was, right? It's a context thing, right? Back when Elise first came out, League of Legends was a cartoon game, right? Like, I've talked about this before. League of Legends back in ye olden times was basically based on the visual style of Warcraft 3. That's why Ashe is just the Drow Ranger from Dota. That's why she's just like a riff on that. It's because so much of the legacy of League of Legends visual style is Warcraft 3. It's the Warcraft 3 style of design, the Blizzard style of design from that time, right? That's why Caitlyn looked like a stripper. That's why a number of characters used to look like strippers. Yes, Misfortune still kind of has that problem. That's where a lot of that design legacy comes from. And Elise was very much designed in the context of that, right? Like that this is like a Warcraft 3 high fantasy, like cheese fest kind of situation where subtlety is not really a character design priority ever, under any circumstances. And for Elise, that was like fine back then. That she was like this super cartoony, like very like turbo-sexualized Black Widow character, right? With like this ridiculous sort of cartoon villain Spider Queen outfit, who's like the absolute opposite of subtlety. The problem is that her story, the lore of Elise, more and more became focused around, oh, she's actually like a spider pulling the strings from the shadow. Like she's actually someone who's hiding in plain sight, and she's actually someone who's like passes unseen among. And that's just like, not when she looks like that, she's not. Like, not with that costume she is. And, like, there's no... With old Elise, or with Elise as she is, there's no real difference between her spider form and her human form. They are both monstrous, right? Like, one of them is monstrous brackets sexy, and the other is monstrous brackets, like, actual spider. But it's still... both of them are monsters, right? This version here, I think, does a much better job of implying the idea that if she's just not showing off the spider legs directly, this woman could walk around and sort of pass as a normal human being. There's a greater contrast between her human form and the spider form, right? Like, because she's just kind of there, and now it's kind of just, she's just kind of wearing a weird costume, right? Like, it just kind of looks like high fashion a little bit. The idea that Elise is someone who can hide her spider form under a dress, right? That she could just put on a big dress and, like, curl her spider legs up, and then no one would know until it was too late. That's plausible now, in a way that it simply wasn't with her own old character design. So in many ways, this is just a straight-up better base character design for Elise. At least, again, if we take the idea that this is going to be the state of the canon, right? Like, that this is all about what Arcane has turned the main canon of League of Legends into, right? This is a much better design for that. And the fucking animation here is astonishingly beautiful. The way they handle her physicality is really, really good. Also, like, the thing of, like, she does this thing where she's, like, she steps forward, she's looking at Katarina, she rears up, gets into this, like, posture, right? Like, as though she's just, like, she's gonna look at Katarina for a second or say something, or there's gonna be this moment of staring each other down, but then, nope. Immediate poison breath. Or whatever the hell this is. Also, multiple pupils inside one eye. I like that. That's cool. Anyway, back to Darius, somehow holding his own against Trundle. Here's another thing that annoys me in terms of lore. Darius's axe cutting into Trundle's club? Again, the lore as it is, that's not really supposed to be possible because Trundle's club is made of true ice. And true ice is like, you can't break that with an axe. That's not how that works. That's the whole point of True Eyes, is that it's pretty fucking unbreakable by anything. It can't be melted. It can't be chipped. You can't, like, you have to use powerful magic or some kind of... True Eyes is not a thing that just, like, shatters because you smack an axe into it. And it bothers me that Trundle's club is broken by the end of this fight. Because, again, like, that's not what the story was before. The whole point of Trundle's club is that it is unbreakable. But I do like that, like, we see visually that, like, Darius, not an Iceborn, right? Once True Eyes starts running up his arm, he's like, no, actually, I don't want to deal with that. And he throws it away. Like, I do like that we get this visual demonstration that these powers are, to a certain extent, kind of beyond him. So let's try and wrestle instead. And I like that doesn't go well for him. I like that he gets his ass whooped by Trundle most of the time. Again, the narrative of the cinematic itself is this, right? Like, that Darius is taking on this task that's probably beyond him in a way that's not really a good idea, but he's taking the risk, and he's like pushing his strength to its absolute maximum boundaries as much as he can because Noxus, right? Because I like it when the bite marks break skin, as indeed they very nearly do right there. Everyone feeling normal about this, chat? Are you all feeling normal? You all feeling, No one here's jealous of Darius, I'm sure. No one here is like, oh man, that should have been me, being picked up by Trundle and slammed into the ground, and then he gets on top of me and pins my arms to the ground and drools in my face a little bit. No one in chat is like, oh, that should have been me. No one in chat. Like, you wouldn't be like that. You're not weird freaks. You're not perverts. Of course you're not. Of course you're not. You would never. That's another thing I do like about this fight scene, is like that there is it's like, it's grim and brutal, but there is like that intimacy of the fight, right? It's not just framed as sort of, like, think of how a fight between two characters would be framed in a Warhammer 40k cinematic, right? That universe, that aesthetic has a tendency to mostly focus on, like, just brutality, blood, hurt, pain. Here, there's, like, an intimacy of... There's a focus on the intimacy of being in a fight like this against an opponent, like Trundle, right? Bodies colliding, clinching, touching. And that's just the Fortiche thing, right? Like, that's the Fortiche way. That's the way they... You see this as well in, like, a bunch of the fights in Arcane, is, like, the way Fortiche handles these physical confrontations. They focus a lot on the emotional and physical intimacy of a fight. And intimacy does not mean gentleness. Intimacy does not mean, like, sweetness or kindness. Intimacy just means that it's a close physical and emotional connection between two people. Like, think of the Echo and Jinx fight, for example, right? Like, that also has that rendering of the violence as not just, oh, one person is doing damage to the other, but an extension of the intimacy of the emotional relationship between Echo and Jinx as characters, right? Like, that's extended into that. And I like the intimacy of the way that Fortiche stages and shoots fights like these. Not in the sense that you're supposed to read it as sexual necessarily, like, not that the cinematic itself is, like, going for that, but that it allows for that. Also, a lot in the way that the shots are framed, the way that the camera work is interacting with the bodies as they're colliding. Again, I think there's a big difference here between how fights in a lot of other franchises would be shot and handled from, like, a storyboard perspective. Just kidney, more or less. I mean, who knows where Trundle's kidneys are? That's not a kidney, probably. That's more like, yeah, I don't know. It's also not a kung fu fight, right? Like, it's also not... That's the other thing about the way that Fortiche handles fights. It's also often, like... There is definitely in the way that Fortiche handles fights, sometimes they go for the balletic, right? Sometimes they go for, like, that well-choreographed, like, perfect... like, song and dance of combat, right? Like, when characters are, like, performing moves at each other. but a lot of the time they're also very good at handling fights in a way that's a little bit more realistic to what a fight actually is, which is it tends to be pretty scrappy and kind of ugly and not very elegant because it's fundamentally a pretty brutal thing. And the fight between Trundle and Darius here is very much an example of that. This is not like two people doing martial arts at each other. This is a fight, right? Like, this is two people just trying to beat the crap out of each other as best they can before the other guy has a chance to do it first, right? It's not coordinated. It's not elegant. It's a slugfest in a way that I really in a way I really enjoy. They're not doing boxing moves, right? Like, they're not like fucking ducking and weaving, doing fucking MMA moves. This is a fucking fight, right? And Darius, by the way, this is the smallest Darius we've had in a while. Darius has had an inconsistent physicality across various bits of media, but he's usually depicted as extremely wide, right? He's usually depicted as like just the brickest shithouse that a man can possibly get. And this Darius is not really that. He's got a little bit more waist to him, right? Like, he not a ton. He's got a little bit more waist to him. He's a little bit more slim. Not that he's not jacked as shit, just to be clear. Just that compared to other Dariuses, like, compare and contrast even with what he looks like in 2XKO, frankly, which is the other more recent thing, or like what he looks like in Legends of Runeterra. Actually, that's actually a good point of comparison. Let me just find that real quick. Right? That's a pretty different Darius right there. That's not quite the same character, is it? Let's see if we can find like a better picture of his physicality specifically. I think once they get to the... Yeah, like, that's a much bigger, more Dorito-shaped man in a lot of ways, right? And that comes down in part to... Like, this is the Fortiche version, right? Like, this is the version that's calculated for something like an Arcane. But it's definitely a different approach to his physicality. It's more grounded. It's closer to something that looks like what a human being could possibly look like. And that's again, Legends of Runeterra Darius and the other versions of Darius that we know are not really designed to be characters who would work in a physical context. But, like, my dude here, he's smaller than Richter is in Arcane. Right, like, he's less buff, he's less bulgy, he's less chunky than Richter even is. He's also younger, yes, but, like, physically he's a smaller guy, and that's again sort of the thing of, like, when I read this as a character design, I don't really see this guy as like the one who enters into a one-on-one duel with the enemy general and wins. I see this as, like, in terms of visual storytelling, that's what the other Darius kind of is in his character design. Is like, he is the strongest guy who's the strongest guy. Who's just so strong. But Darius, like I said, in his lore, his story is that his power, his superpower, isn't really that he himself is the most brilliant warrior who ever lived. His superpower is that he's a leader of men, right? He's the best general ever. He's the best, like, frontline war leader who has ever walked the earth, right? So this is like a very different approach to who Darius is and how he looks. Let's skip past all these gay sex scenes. And again, this thing I said, right? Intimacy. As Trundle begins to try and rip his head off his shoulders, look what the camera does, right? Like, the camera's pretending to be like a handheld camera, right? It's pretending like there's a cameraman there who's, like, trying to catch the action, and we got all this motion blurring going on. And so the camera is, like, running in, almost like it's a documentary filmmaker who's trying to get a really good shot of this guy's head getting ripped clean off his shoulders. And so we get this focus on, like, Darius's facial expressions, right? And that mixture of fear and powerlessness and unwillingness to give up. And like this desperation that he's doing of trying to get these giant hands to stop squeezing him. Again, no one in chat is jealous. No one in chat is feeling like they should be the ones being squeezed half to death in Trundle's enormous hands. No one in chat is jealous of this because they're not weird pervert freaks. We wouldn't do that here in this community. And that's when we get the return of the axe as a symbol, right? Like, this was a pain. Holding the axe, using the axe was a pain. That Darius was kind of like, nope, fuck that, I'm throwing this away. Like, that's too painful, I'm going for another way. Now that there's no other way, right? Like, now that this is the only thing that's there, well, fuck it, I'll face the pain, right? Like, I'll deal with it. And you can see that mortal beings, like anyone who's not iceborn, really shouldn't be holding on to true ice weapons, because you get frostbite really, really, really fast. Instantly, in fact. But he just needs it to work for long enough to be smashed across Trundle's head. And this is like, props to the script writers a little bit here. This is a very good way to enable Darius to hit Trundle with his axe without killing him. Because, oh, right, it was completely frozen. That means it had become brittle. And because it was brittle, it's a blunt weapon now somehow. It won't cut him. It won't just decapitate him. So Trundle just gets a big smack in his head, but then he's fine, right? He's just knocked out. Don't worry, kids. Uncle Trundle is perfectly okay. Again, that little bit of keeping it PG, right? For all that these guys have been slugging it the fuck out with each other, right? Like kicking the absolute crap out of each other. Not a lot of bruising. No broken nose, no blood on the teeth, no actual physical visible wounds or injuries. Because we can't do that. This is a trailer for League of Legends, so we can't do that. People can't actually get hurt. Which, you know, again, it weakens the short, I think. Like, I think this, as a piece of filmmaking, this thing is substantially weakened by its inability to engage with either sexuality or brutality, right? Of not being able to really show physical violence and the consequences of it. Not realistically, because this isn't realistic at all, but it's not able to show the consequences of this kind of physical violence honestly, right? It's not able to show the kinds of damage that getting in a fight like this actually causes you. It's just, we sort of imply the blood with this little scrap of red cloth over Darius' shoulder. We imply, oh no, he's badly hurt, even though, no, he isn't. He isn't hurt at all. There's no visible injury of any kind on this man, even though Trundle has been beating the shit out of him for the last 5 minutes, right? It's another one of those things that censorship weakens, right? And because, again, one of the great things about Arcane was that it didn't have to care about that. Arcane could just go and be bloody and ugly and sexual and weird and fucked up, and it could go and do that because it didn't have to care about all this ratings bullshit. But now that it's becoming the main canon of League of Legends, right? Now that all of this is going to be the main canon, we get all the aesthetic of Arcane. We get all the beautiful Fortiche physicality, right? All the beautiful Fortiche approach to bodies, to like muscularity, to sweat, to tears, to all of that. But no blood. No blood. No actual bruising. No real injuries. No actual damage caused. None of that inconvenient actual physicality that was so important to the aesthetics of Arcane. No. Everyone's beautiful. Everyone's gorgeous and beautiful, and no one is actually ever hurt or damaged, right? Katarina, when she gets stabbed in the face with a spider leg at the party, which is what Elise does, right? Spider leg swipe directly across her fucking face, cuts her mask in half, but don't worry. There's nothing there, she's fine. She can't be injured by that just because a spider leg literally tears a metal mask in half on her face. There's no blood. No one gets hurt. No one actually, there's no it's just fine. Don't worry about it. It's censorship. It's very annoying censorship. And this is the kind of censorship, by the way. You're not going to hear the free speech fuckfaces talk about this at all. Because they don't give a shit, right? When they talk about free speech, they don't talk about this. This is not what they give a shit about. Their concept of free speech is we should be allowed to be as transphobic as we fucking want. Whereas the actual artistic limitations that come from corporate censorship, right? The corporate mandate to keep things within, like, the comfort limits of some ratings board run by conservatives, the ways in which that limits human expression, that's not really what they give a shit about, right? They don't care about it. That's not a censorship issue to them. But it is to me, because it does annoy me that honesty about what it is to throw your body into a fight against someone that was very much present in Arcane, right? Arcane had an honest approach to the kind of damage that you take from being in a fight. Not completely, like Jinx, after blowing herself up with a grenade, yeah, she's damaged, but like notably hasn't blown half her face off or whatever, right? There is a limit to how much they were willing and able to do with Arcane, and I think they could have pushed it further, frankly. But Arcane was able to make shit look ugly, sometimes, in a way that this cinematic kind of isn't. I like this depiction of a Noxtora a lot, by the way. Because if the visual reference is the Arc de Triomphe, right? Or, well, Arcs of Triumph. There's more than one of them. But I really do like this. Because the Noxtora are like a feature of the lore. They've been around forever. Which is Noxus likes to raise these structures and obelisks over territories that they've conquered as a means to proclaim their ownership over them. As they've been depicted, though, they haven't really been depicted as artistic creations historically in the way that they've been depicted in League of Legends media. They've been depicted as, here's a big fuck off obelisk or a big gate, and then that means we own you now. I like this approach where not only is the Noxtora like this big monumental building that says like, hey, fuck you, we're Noxus, we're here. It's also an art piece, right? It's also a piece of like lots of carvings of Noxian history and Noxian heroes and like this cultural proclaiming of ownership over the land through this giant like artificial artifact that's been raised, right? It's an Arc de Triomphe. It's a monument to Noxian triumph, right? That valorizes Noxus and Noxian history and proclaims its cultural superiority. I like that as a bit of storytelling, that like this is how Noxus colonizes land that they own. It's like they just raise these fuck off huge carved sculptures that just say, us, we live here, this is ours, right? I like that. Like that reflects a way in which colonizing empires genuinely behave in reality. Another nice little move from Fortiche there, as Mel walks in front of the sun, becomes her own little eclipse. That's when we do the swap into the mind vision thing, right? And another little move that Fortiche is fond of, the little flicker of the eyelashes, or the eyelids, right? As we transition from reality to dream, or mental projection, or whatever. Little flicker of the eyelid. You can see how the highlights in the eyes just vanish. And now we're in the dream space, right? Or the mage vision, or whatever the fuck it is that's happening to Mel here. And then we cut to the immortal bastion with its, like, hellfire mouth rising in front of her. Very good. Love a good smear. Where did that pillow come from, by the way? Like, that wasn't... Oh, it was there. Wait, hang on. Oh, I see. That's that fucking thing. I thought that was a part of the design on the floor. I was confused by that for a second, because I was like, oh, this is all flat, right? Like, but the pillar is actually there. Okay. I was fooled by a forced perspective. Love a smear. Look at that. Again, Elise's body acting is really good. Because, like, she lets the dagger hit. She only moves out of the way the exact minimum amount of distance that she has to in order to not get tagged by it. And then again, we get, like, the little Fortiche move with the eyes, right? Like, the little flicker of the eyelid under the mask. That sort of indicates, okay, something's happening there. And then, whoop, spider time. Oh my god. That's my nightmare right there. Like, just spider running up my arm like that. Fuck me. Right into the camera, too. Fuck off, Fortiche, you assholes. Ugh, gross. But I do love a good smear. And I like that they incorporated Katarina's preference for spinning, right? That she's not doing her ult necessarily, but she's like spinning around in order to shake these things off and doing some fancy knife moves while she's at it. And I like that. That's like a good way to incorporate that that's how she fights. Even if in an actual sword fight, generally speaking, you don't want to spin around because that's a very, like, that's just leaving your back open. Love a good smear. I wish it weren't done with motion blur, but, you know, that's just me. It's funny the way, like, you look at the way the arm is cheating to camera, right? Because we're doing this, like, strong foreshortening as she's throwing out the knives. And then now we have to have her do another move, so... Just... whoops. Mixing the model back and having her grab her knife out of thin air. Which, again, I wonder about that, like... Because Katarina in League of Legends, right? Has really just always been, she's just a really good assassin, right? She's good at doing martial arts, something or other, whatever, right? I wonder if she's gonna be recontextualized as a mage in the context of Arcane and all. Like, does she have magical powers, or is this all just sleight of hand martial arts that she can just materialize knives out of thin air? The daggers themselves are magic? Yeah, probably. It'll probably be something like that. Again, I love the way they handle Elise's animation. Because even this little move where she's just kind of stepping to the side... Oi. Bless me. For I have sinned. Even there, right, she's using her spider legs as part of her motion and movement. And her movement is a little bit uncanny and weird, right? Like, that's not really how a person would move. Very good. Again, I like the way, like, because, like, Elise leads with the claw hand, right? Like, with her own hand, slash. And then secondarily, the spider leg comes in at a lower angle, so Katarina really has to dodge out of the way. I like that. That makes sense for me as a way that Elise fights, right? That it would be this thing of using all of her limbs simultaneously to do what she does. I like it a lot better than her ranged attacks in-game, I'll tell you what. Where she just kind of waves a hand vaguely and then some poison happens out of nowhere. This to me feels like much better way to do Elise specifically fighting. Setting up the Shunpo. And here, like when she grabs Katarina's arm, all of the spider legs come in to help, right? As a natural extension of just how she moves as a person. When she has to dodge out of the swipe. With the noodle arm, all of a sudden producing a knife out of thin air. Same thing. The spider legs step in to help, allowing her to pivot around her own center of gravity in a way that's really weird and unnatural. I really like it. And then Shunpo. Whoop. Nothing there. And now Fortiche gets to have fun with the fucking foreshortening. Now we really get to play as Elise goes Spider-Man mode. As Sneaky would say, spamming the cum shot. Esports. Like the deep foreshortening into camera. And like the way, like as Katarina is moving to set up for the swipe here, right? The way that her upper body and her torso turns first, and then the knife gets like dragged after it into like this big swing. God, it's fucking gorgeous. And near as I can tell, it's probably a mixture, but near as I can tell, all the web stuff is 2D animated over the top of the 3D animation that's happening, which is like... gorgeous. Using Katarina's ponytail, using the dress to really emphasize the twirl. And it's a very different camera in this fight as well, right? Like, it's a very different camera in the fight between Elise and Katarina, right? It doesn't have that sort of documentary handheld camera quality to it that the fight with Trundle has, like where the camera is always shaky, always like going all over the place, like pushing in, pulling out, like having trouble sort of following the action. With Katarina and Elise, the camera is generally much steadier, right? Like, camera is not really, it seems to be like on, again, it's three-dimensional, so there's no cameraman, but the camera seems to be put on dollies, like it's tracking the shots around, it's following the motions of the characters, it's keeping certain things in frame in a very intentional way. And I like that. That's like... it's a really effective way to show the difference in these two fights, right? That this fight here is much more like that ballet. This fight here is much more like a coordinated performance. Because I think, again, that's kind of part of the point, right? Like, that Katarina has come to assassinate this Black Rose guy, but ultimately all of this is a performance, right? Like, this is LeBlanc, who's orchestrating all of this. It is all a dance. It is all a performance. And it's probably all just a test of Katarina, right? Like, to see whether or not she can pull off a job and be useful, or just LeBlanc wants to eliminate this specific guy from the organization, and the easiest way to do that is to pretend like he got assassinated by an outsider, and have Elise show up and do sort of like, yes, definitely, I'm his bodyguard, and I'm definitely not gonna let him get killed. Oh no, well, we tried our best. Like, who knows? It could be any fucking number of things. As Katarina gets the kill, and gets the 300 gold. First blood. So these guys... again, I don't know how much to read lore into this, because these guys look like the fucking Grey Legion. Is the thing. They look like the revived corpse warriors that Noxus uses in Legends of Runeterra, but which there had been no, like, which, like, they sort of implied maybe was a thing in Arcane without really confirming it. And I guess this is just making it more explicit that the Grey Legion is, like, there. And it's going to be, like, the Grey Legion is going to be the way they... Because that's the thing. The Grey Legion is heavily associated with Scion, right? Like, the Grey Legion was invented for Legends of Runeterra to be supporting cards to Scion, specifically, right? And so the presence of the Grey Legion to me is like, okay, that feels like the kind of stuff that would lead to Scion being a presence in the show, or being a presence in the story. But I wonder if that's just what they're doing with Vladimir, because like Scion was made in part by Vladimir, right? Like, or at least Vladimir's blood magic was an important part of how Scion was made once upon a time. So is this just gonna be set up for Vladimir then, and Scion isn't really gonna get to be a character as such? He's just a big, scary monster that Vladimir made. I don't know. Because that would disappoint me. Scion is interesting specifically because he is both like an unstoppable juggernaut zombie warrior, but also there are these little sparks of consciousness left in him, right? There are these little sparks of consciousness left in his mind, memory. He has like some kind of personality in there that always threatens a little bit to break out. And that's what I always found interesting about Scion, is that he was a little bit more than just like a Jekyll and Hyde monster. So we're in Mel's mind space here also. That's the other thing, right? Like, this is not literally happening. This is Mel planning what she's going to do. And what she's gonna do is get way sexier about it. Just like, she's gonna get so fucking sexy about it. Like, she has planned out the fit for this confrontation. But it is like, it feels like a statement of purpose from Mel, right? Like, Noxus is going to throw everything at me, and I'm going to break through that shit, right? Like, Mel is understanding that trying to take on Noxus in any way, trying to find answers, trying to do anything, she's going to have the weight of the city come down upon her, and it's like, she's going to be like, no, fuck it, I'm going to find a way to deal with it. I'm going to do it, right? Which, yeah. Do you ship it? I ship it. Again, the motion, the movement, the way that the legs on Elise's back kind of move, almost as though, like, the body, her human body, is vestigial, right? Like, almost as though that's just something they're kind of carrying around. But, like, these are not actually her main legs, right? Like, these are extraneous limbs, like the pedipalps of a spider's mouth part. It's very good. Like, I like the implication in the way that the legs move, that the main body is kind of extraneous, because that re-emphasizes the idea that the true body is that, right? Fucking hell, she looks good. Just, what a better way to do Elise's spider model. To have these, like, black patches of skin, but, like, with red blood-like substance just oozing around in there. Like, what a nice way to handle that particular part of her storytelling, right? That's, her thing is, she drains people dry of their lifeblood. Find me in the Alps. This is just so fucking pretty, though. Like, this little brook condense, like, this little glacier melt path river down between, like, the two mountainsides coming down. It's like, fucking hell, it's pretty. Fortisha's so fucking good at environment design. And there's Mel realizing how long she still has to go, steeling herself, gathering her courage, and being like, no, I will do this, even though it is hard, right? That's the storytelling, much in the same way that Darius is like, I'll fight this giant troll who's stronger than me, even though it's hard, right? Much like how Katarina sees, oh, there's the true form. Okay, it's me versus absolutely enormous fuck-off giant spider. And she's like, a real challenge, right? Like, she faces that and she sort of relishes it. Same way here. Mel faces the enormity of the challenge and decides to walk forward anyway. Haha. Anyway, say hello to Mother. I like the black fingers. I like that a lot. Stolen a little bit, well, not stolen, but certainly a move that I believe was also used in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness with Wanda, right? Like this idea that someone is touching power to such an extent that it's blackening their fingers, right? Like that you're literally getting scorched or burned by what you're doing. And of course, it should be remembered, this is not LeBlanc's actual character design because LeBlanc is everyone. She's everywhere. She doesn't have a face, right? Like she has a front that she puts on occasionally for whatever purpose, but she doesn't really have a face, right? But for a character who doesn't have a face, this face sure does look good. I like the simplicity of it, too. I like, because, like, LeBlanc at her base character design in League of Legends, right, is based on a stage magician, right? Like, that's the reference that character design is based on. Much like Elise, right? It used to be a much more cartoony game. So old LeBlanc was the stage magician and the stage magician's glamorous assistant, right? Like that's why she wears the stupid, sort of very sexualized, ridiculous clown costume that she does, is because it's a stage performance. She's a stage magician, right? And that's sort of fine for what that was back then. She has changed a lot, though. LeBlanc has become a very different character over time, much more about the manipulation, right? It used to be that she was more of like an active combat character. Now it's much more about, well, she's the one pulling the strings behind the scenes, right? Like she's the one doing the dirty work in the shadows, right? And she has this thing of like, the face is not important. And I do think this is a better design for that. One that's like, yeah, she's got the gold, she's got the expensiveness, she's got the black dress and all that, but also it's not a stage costume, right? Like it's not a costume that's about dazzling people or attracting attention. It's just expensive and fancy. I like that. Like as an expression of who LeBlanc is in the lore, this is definitely better. And as a character design, certainly as, again, Fortiche, thank you so much for what you do for us. There's a face with a little bit of character too. Right? Like, there's a face with, like, an actual nose, for one thing. A nose bridge that's, like, visible and a present part of her face's character. Bit of a mole. She's got, like, a little bit of bagginess under her eyes. There's a flesh. Like, she has flesh in a way that most characters don't. If you look at, like, most anime character design, for example, is very, very absent of flesh and blood. Whereas this, like, feels like a character who has some physical presence. Even as she is definitely unspeakably beautiful, it's not quite so bloodless and weightless as a lot of this kind of character design tends to be. And here comes Astarion. So, this is the Vladimir update we're going with, huh? This is the Vladimir update. I mean, okay. Sure. Again, this is me. So, again, Vladimir, much the same boat as the others, he was created as a cartoon character, right? Like, we can't have a real vampire in League of Legends because of the Chinese market is not super fond of that, I think is the story as it used to be. So he's a bloodmancer who's not a vampire, but he does the magic with the blood, but he is a vampire, right? Like, he's a vampire in every way possible. Except in the actual way that he's a vampire. What he also, in the story of Vladimir as it's been told, he's also been characterized as essentially a Dorian Gray kind of character, right? Like he's this reclusive, weird, hedonistic noble who's kind of legendary in Noxus, who reinvents himself every 100 years or so, who like goes into these long periods of hiding and then emerges with a new identity for himself, a new weirdness, who's like deeply obsessed with art and music and like beautiful things, and like who chooses very specific people to drain the life out of because he like adores their creative soul and things like that. Like he is like in that sense a vampire, but he's also a weirdo. That's kind of the thing, is like Vladimir, as he was conceptualized for a while there, is a weirdo, right? That's why he wears the fucking weirdo outfits that he does. That's why he has that incredible weirdo hairdo that he does, is because he's kind of a sort of hedonistic, abstract, like way out there, campy weirdo who's like also sort of deeply aesthetically obsessed with certain things and like has these odd groupies and cult people, like this personal cult of personality that sort of forms around him that he exploits. And like, this is not really that, is it? This is much more, you know, upper class aristocratic standard twink number 48, right? Like this is somewhat more restrained. This is not Vladimir as a weirdo. This is Vladimir as like a fucking trust fund brat, right? Like, who has gained a little bit too much power and has kind of gone mad with it. In terms of the character design, at least. I'd like him to be a weirdo. Like, I like Vladimir better when he's just like a complete fucking freak show. And he kind of isn't that so much in this character design. There's some things I like. I like his eyes. I quite like the way that they're handling his eyes here, because they're just a little bit too far apart, right? And they're a little bit swollen, and they're a little bit beady in the way that his eyelids are kind of swollen up. I like that. Like, that aspect of it works for me. But I think Vladimir should be more of a freak. I think Vladimir should be more of a like weird, gaudy, excessive hedonistic freak. Rather than, this is too restrained. Like, rather than all this restraint, I would like Vladimir to be a little more freaky. A little bit more Count Orlok, right? A little bit more of that. And a little bit less Astarion. A little bit less sort of beautiful murder twink kind of thing. Yeah, he looks a little too like Viego, as someone is pointing out in chat. And I'm not 100% sold on his sassiness here either. The way that he's animated. Nor the uncertainty. Because again, Vladimir, as he's conceptualized in the story, he's been alive for like 2,000 years. He's been alive since the Darkin, right? He's been around for a while. He's as old. He's not quite as old, I think, as LeBlanc, but he's not young, right? He's not a junior partner in this relationship. He has been around for a very, very long time, right? And he's not uncertain of things. He doesn't lack confidence in anything, and he wouldn't be freaked out, right? When something like this happens, right? Like, that's the dialogue that's in this scene, right? It's like Vladimir's like, hey, that whole thing with the Ascension and like the Glorious Evolution and how that little freak twink in Piltover nearly took over the world kind of thing, that was a little too far. That freaked me out a little bit. And I feel like Vladimir wouldn't be like that. He'd be like, wow, another almost apocalypse. How many are we up to this century, right? Like, he should be more casual about that rather than kind of tense and like, yeah, that was maybe a little too much, don't you think? Like, rather than sort of, because the dynamic in the scene here is that LeBlanc is the one who's like, yes, it was a near apocalypse. There's always a near apocalypse. They always happen. Don't worry about it. We will focus on our core goals. And Vladimir is the uncertain one who like has to be told the facts by LeBlanc, right? So she can be menacing and scary. I don't think Vladimir is the right character for that. Like, I think Vladimir ought to be too old and too powerful and too certain of himself and too immortal to care about that. Like, I don't think, again, I don't think Vladimir should be a sort of edgy, or like a sort of on edge. I was about to say edged twink, but that's a different thing. I don't think he should be like this sort of slightly nervous, high-strung twink character, right? I think he should be more calm, sort of more like, oh, almost an apocalypse. Well, that would have been fun. Haven't had one of those in a while. Like, he should be someone who's sort of looking forward to great upheaval and chaos and destruction, because for him, that's just an opportunity to indulge in, like, hedonism, right? Like, that feels more like the Vladimir character that we know. So this is a very different conception of him. And I don't think I like it on the face of it. Again, if only Arcane wasn't canon, right? If only Arcane wasn't replacing the characters that existed already, I wouldn't care. I would be happy to have a different version of Vladimir. That would be fine by me. But because this is apparently going to be the new Vladimir who's replacing Vladimir as he exists in the lore completely, I'm sorry, I have many, many, many nitpicks and criticisms, because the character that exists is good and interesting and fascinating and could be used for many good and interesting and fascinating things. But because apparently this Vladimir's personality is constructed for the purposes of having this dynamic with LeBlanc in whatever the Noxus show is going to turn out to be, I'm going to mourn the loss of the character that was. Anyway, is that why Darius is in the Freljord? Is because he's going to fucking try and go for the fucking Watchers? Like, is it literally a thing of, like, LeBlanc wants Noxus to push into the Freljord so she can go and have a chat with Lysandra and try and exploit the power of the Watchers in the Howling Abyss? Because, number one, that would fucking kind of rule, actually. It also looks like a Nefiri dagger. Yeah, I think you might be right about that. I think it might just be the Nefiri dagger with the eye on it. But then why not show any Shurima? Because, like, if we're doing Nefiri and her dagger, then we're doing Shurima, because that's where she is, right? So then why have all this Freljord focus? Like, I'm assuming that the Freljord presence in the cinematic is meaningful. On that assumption, this looks like the Watchers in the dark, or in the Howling Abyss. On the assumption that this is Darkin shit, then this definitely looks like the handle, the pommel, and the dagger of Nefiri, right? Retcon Nefiri into the Freljord. That would be so stupid. That would be very stupid. But if they're doing Nefiri, then they have to do Darkins, right? And that Vladimir is an apprentice of a Darkin. Like, that's where he learned his blood magic, is from a Darkin a couple of thousand years ago when he was a slave boy, right? Like, that's where Vladimir got his powers. So I guess, but it would be weird to have LeBlanc be the one bringing up Darkin, because LeBlanc's main objective, and that's the other question about, like, if the show is now going, like, if we're now replacing the lore of Noxus, it used to be that LeBlanc's main purpose, the reason why she runs the Black Rose, the reason why she does anything, is because Mordekaiser is coming back, and she's trying to stop him, right? Like, Mordekaiser is gonna come back, he's going to destroy the entire fucking world and kill everyone, and LeBlanc's whole thing is trying to gather all of this occult power to have some means to resist him when he does return, right? That used to be her thing. Is that still gonna be her thing? We don't really know, because there's been no sign of it. Like, there's been no sign of Mordekaiser's presence in any of the imagery around Noxus at all. So is that still gonna be her deal, that she's trying ultimately in her weird way to save the world? I don't know. What is LeBlanc up to? No one really knows. Is she going for Nefiri? Is that what we're doing here? Is she going for the Watchers in the Void? Either way, that doesn't seem to have anything to do with Mordekaiser. So, I don't know. What is LeBlanc up to? What does she want? What does she do? Who the fuck knows? Because, like, I'm up for the Darkin. But if they're doing the Darkin, that should be in the context of a Shurima-focused show, right? That should be in the context of a show that, like, gives us the history of ancient Shurima or something. Like, do the fucking Nasus and Renekton show. Like, Nasus and Renekton, Azir and Serath, two pairs of brothers, both struggling, have that, like, that's perfect for an Arcane style piece of storytelling, right? If you're gonna do the Darkin, you kind of have to do the backstory, right? Like, you kind of have to go, where did the Darkin come from? And, well, that's ancient Shurima stuff. So I don't know. It would be weird to introduce Nefiri. That would be weird. Like, certainly, because she could show up as a monster, right? Like, Nefiri could show up as like, oh, I found this artifact that makes a powerful monster. I'm gonna find it, I'm gonna give it to someone, and then we're gonna use that as a weapon in the war of the whatever, like, whatever the fuck it is LeBlanc is doing, sure. But Nefiri is more than that. Like, she's a character, she's a person, right? Like, she's a person, like, who has her own agenda, her own wants, her own needs, her own desires. And I don't really know how you square that with a show that's set in Noxus about Noxian politics stuff. So I don't know that, like, Nefiri wouldn't make sense to me, but a dagger shape with an eye on it also feels very much like that's gesturing at that. So, like, given the Freljord stuff, I'm thinking more that this is the Howling Abyss. This shape here would be Lysandra, right? With the arms out and the helmet, stuff like that. And that this would be the Watchers in the Void. That makes more sense to me. Given that we have, like, this Freljord stuff with Darius clearly attempting an incursion into troll territory. If there aren't a bunch of AO3 fanfics about these two fucking nasty already, I think the League of Legends fandom has failed. I do like the fear in his eyes. Right? Darius isn't just like, I am angry and I'm powerful. This is like, fuck, I'm dying, I'm gonna die. If I don't do something about this, I'm gonna die. And then he reaches, like, for a last burst of strength and anger. But he is scared, right? Like, that it's not just, I'm a space marine. Right? But he's terrified and he manages to just barely wriggle himself out of it. I like that. That's more compelling to me than if he was just, like, a space marine guy. Also, just fuck me running this fucking thing is so pretty. Like, it's the Fortiche thing, right? Like, you can stop on almost any frame of this fucking thing, and it's a fucking desktop wallpaper. Well, except for all the color banding and the bad compression, but that's YouTube's fault, not really the thing itself. Is that the Black Rose spy? Is that her face? Something like it, anyway. Oh, hey, Wolf. What are you doing here? The little vents in the side of the mask that she spews her poison from. This is such a better character design for her. It's not even funny. It's so pretty. It's so fucking pretty. so fucking pretty. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of commentary here, just that... Just that Fortisha's so fucking good at this. It's just so pretty. I do wonder about Mel and all the gold stuff on her, because it's like, the implication is that all of this is like just an expression of her magic power, but then it looks like it's painted on aesthetically. Like, it doesn't look like it's in her skin, it looks like it's on her skin. I wonder about that. I wonder how that works. Again, just every frame. Oh, right, they're minions, you're right. Someone in chat said that with the red and blue of the cloaks of the people dancing here, that they sort of evoke minions on Summoner's Rift. There's a purple one over there. I don't really know what that one's supposed to be. And also, I don't think any of the minions look like that necessarily. But there is definitely that element to it. I think you're right about that. That we're sort of evoking the idea of Summoner's Rift, right? Which again squares with the idea of, like, performance. That it's a show, it's a game, rather than being real. Man, why isn't Trundle using any of his abilities? Where's your R, my man? Report this Trundle for feeding. He's not even leveling up. Not even using his abilities. He used R to undress him. I guess. So fucking pretty. It really just... Fortiche has kind of ruined me a little bit for so many other animated shows. Because it's like... Because they carried Arcane Season 2. Like, not... They carried Arcane Season 1. Like, all of Arcane is carried on Fortiche's back. The writing of Arcane would never have worked. They would never have gotten away with it, ever, if not for Fortiche's sheer strength of visual storytelling. If Fortiche's visual storytelling wasn't there to pick up the slack for all of the stuff that the writing can't do, right? Like, so much of the stuff that the writing didn't have time to tell in the context of Arcane Season 1 and 2, that's Fortiche. Like, their visual storytelling, literally every picture is worth 1,000 words. Like, that's if it hadn't been for Fortiche as an animation studio, if it hadn't been for them and their directors and their storyboarding artists and their animators, Arcane would never have worked even a little bit. Not even a little bit. It is so much just how fucking good Fortiche are at creating emotional resonance and telling story with imagery is the reason why it worked. Because imagine this if it had been like an animated series outsourced to some overworked and underpaid studio of like working Korean animators, sort of working on crunch time and not enough pay, and like imagine trying to tell the same story in the same amount of time. Imagine how that would have turned out, right? Not because those people aren't good at their work, but because they are just so hyper exploited and there's so little care about craft that goes into those productions that choose to outsource that way, right? It fucking hell, it's pretty. Anyway, I think I've exhausted the things I wanted to say about it. Right now, I just want to sit here and gawk at it. And marvel at how much better of a character design this is for Elise. Just start to finish straight up, just a better character design. Oh. Yeah, I think that's it. Bye.